Welcome everyone. And today we have the battle of the ages. We have the Super Nintendo Entertainment System controller versus the Sega Saturn controller. I don't know why I said it like Saturn, but these are two of the greatest controllers to ever exist and that ever will exist. They are both perfect for 2D gaming, you know, retro games, all that good stuff. We need to find out which one is better, and that's what we're gonna do today. So I'm gonna start with the Super Nintendo controller, but we can't just start showing this one. We gotta take it back a bit to see the predecessor to this one. So the Nintendo Entertainment System controller. This is a very good controller for what it was able to do in 1983 actually with the Famicom. That was the Japanese NES. That was actually hardwired to the console, which that design choice did not age well. But here in North America, we got it. You just plug it into the console. I mean, it's just such a simple controller. Works so beautifully. I mean, they're really able to push the limits. You know, in Castlevania, you would have to press up to access certain weapons and all that. So they really put it to its limits. You know, some people don't like the hard edges. I get that, and that's, you know, completely understandable, but I hold it in a way where it doesn't really bother me. So now we have the Super Nintendo controller, and it was definitely a huge leap from the Nintendo Entertainment System controller. It is just better in almost every way. Love the NES controller, but this one is one for the ages. That's why we're comparing it to the Saturn controller here today. But yeah, the Super Nintendo controller, what can you really say about it? It is truly one of the best controllers ever made. I mean, it fits perfectly in your hands, like that nice dog bone shape, as they say. It just fits absolutely perfect. The buttons are nice. They're nice and clicky. The shoulder buttons, you know, not many games use them. I bet there were games. It's just a lot of the games that I've played haven't really used them to like insane like abilities. The D-pad is very, very nice. The one thing that this controller was truly revolutionary for was, well, of course, you know, I mentioned the shoulder buttons right here, but the diamond layout. The diamond layout, guys, all right? This is probably one of the best like controller layouts ever, because when you're playing a game, right, you can hold Y to run, do a charge shot like in Megaman X. It's just, you seamlessly switch back and forth from Y and B. It is truly just absolutely beautiful what they're able to do with that. Now, the Super Famicom controller is essentially the same thing, okay? It's literally the exact same controller except for one distinct difference. Well, of course, it's colored compared to the purple buttons here. I kind of prefer the purple buttons. I mean, I like them both. I just think, I don't know. It's classy. It is classy, but this is really fun too. I like that a lot. But you'll notice the Y and X buttons, concave on this controller, but on this one, convex. So I kind of prefer this more because it just gives a more defined button press here, and it feels better, you know, differentiating the buttons on this one, but this is still good. And the controller length is shorter on this one, so that's why I don't really use this one. This one, I mean, it's plenty big. It'll go places, man. Now it's time to look into the Sega Saturn controller. Like with the Super Nintendo controller, we can't just jump in right away. We have to start with its origins. Now, this was not Sega's first console, right? But I think that like this one is the most similar to the Saturn controller. Now, you know, the Master System controller, I don't believe that was Sega's first console, but that controller is horrible. I don't have it with me, but I've used it at a convention, and it was just absolutely abhorrent. It's just a worse NES controller. The D-pad is awful. One of the worst controllers I have ever used, personally. The worst controller I've used is the Atari Jaguar controller. I used that at the same convention. It is a horrible controller, don't even bother. But when they released this Sega Genesis controller when it came out, it was just so cool. Like, it's huge compared to we were going from the NES controller. I mean, look at the size difference. It might not be that much of a difference, but like when you hold it in your hands, you can tell there is a huge difference in the size, and I really do like the 3-button controller. One issue though, the earlier models of this controller, the D-pad was really stiff on like the really early, just the earlier models. There's like a million different variations of this controller, but yeah, it's very stiff. You might not be able to tell, but it's just, I can't show it, but you see it, you'll understand if you feel this controller, this original variant. It's still, it works and it's still good, but it's not the best. But you know, we still have 3 buttons, which is more than the NES. Not much. You'll notice a lot of Genesis games don't really, you know, they'll have A as like a special thing, like in the Streets of Rage games and like Shinobi, that is used as a special attack or just special whatever. Now with the advent of, you know, a lot of fighting games coming out like Street Fighter 2, you know, you couldn't just have 3 buttons. It wasn't gonna cut it, so they knew that they needed to upgrade and make a new controller. And then this is where we had the Genesis 6-button controller. Now I will say I do prefer this over the 3-button. I do like the 3-button though. This one, what really carries it for me is the amazing D-pad, and we will get that into this later when we talk about the Saturn controller, but the D-pad is just beautiful. It's soft, but it's so smooth and just, you can fire at all 8 directions without a problem. It is just beautiful. The form factor is a little weird. I will say I do kind of prefer the 3 buttons form factor a little bit more, but I don't mind this at all. I do like the smaller buttons. It's like, it's nice. And then the 6 buttons, you know, that was used for a fair amount of games. The only one I have that works with it is Ranger X. Yes, you know I need to get more Genesis stuff. I love Genesis, one of my favorite consoles, but I only have so much for it. But yeah, this controller, I was looking for a good Genesis controller because I've actually had a lot of issues finding a good working 3-button controller. The 2 of the ones that I bought, and I had to clean them out, and it was just annoying. Like, it wouldn't respond to my inputs well. It was just not great. But then this one, when I bought this, it just worked flawlessly. No issues at all with it. It was beautiful. So this is one of the best controllers from that era. They really hit it out of the park. And then here we have the Sega Saturn controller. This is the gray variant here. Sorry about the lighting, it's kind of bad. But this is basically just an evolution of the 6-button controller, but it's just, it feels even better to hold. I mean, look at the shape of that compared to this freaking bean. This is a bean, okay? This is a nice ergonomic controller. It feels so good. Just to hold it, it feels amazing. The most notable inclusion now is the 2 shoulder buttons, and they're like computer mice, like they're micro switches, you know? They feel really good, but it continues the amazing 6-button layout and the amazing D-pad of that one. But this one manages just to be a touch better, I think. I do think this is a better D-pad. I don't really know why. I think it's not nearly as soft, but it's just soft enough. It is so perfect. Like, this is the greatest D-pad ever made. Sega weren't even the people who made the D-pad or put it on the map. But like this D-pad, like, it's just such a shame that this style of D-pad just got shafted. Like, all the major companies, they don't make D-pads like this anymore, and it sucks that they don't, because it's just so perfect. Now, I love the Sega Saturn controller. If it wasn't already abundantly clear, I mean, if you haven't caught up on that yet, what are you doing, man? But, you know, we gotta compare it to the Super Nintendo controller. Let's look at the key differences here. So, clearly, you know, different button layout. This one, you know, obviously has the 6 row of buttons, which is definitely better for fighting games. If you want a good fighting game controller, get either the 6-button or a 6-button Genesis controller or this one, it is perfect for that. But the Super Nintendo will work just fine for those types of games because you still have 6 buttons. And some people might prefer the shoulder buttons over the 6-button layout. Depending on who you are, I mean, it's really up to you. Now, comparing the D-pads, I do think the Saturn D-pad is far superior, but the Super Nintendo D-pad ain't half bad. I do consider this one of the best D-pads as well, but it's not as good for like a shoot 'em up game, like an 8-directional game, like something like Wild Guns or Pocky and Rocky. It works well for those games. It works better than like a PlayStation D-pad. I think PlayStation D-pads suck for like shoot 'em ups and like 8-directional like 2D games. Like it just feels horrible because you have that indent in the controller. The you know what I mean? Like there's doesn't have the middle part. So I think this definitely works better than those. You can still fire in all 8 directions, but it just does not feel as good as the Saturn's D-pad. I think the Saturn's D-pad just works a lot better for those types of games, along with 4-directional games like a platformer. Both these controllers excel at, but the Super Nintendo controller, I will say, is better for certain 2D games. And that lies with Megaman X. So we'll use Megaman X4 as an example because that is, I think, it might have been the only Megaman X game on Saturn. I don't know. I don't know if X5 came out on Saturn. I didn't really care for X5, but X4 is a pretty good game. I like X4. But with Megaman X, just holding Y down and then doing the B like for jumping, it just feels so much more natural. Where with the Saturn controller, when you're holding down B or whatever, you know, holding down the button and jumping, it is not as intuitive unless you like do that, but then you're gonna get like arthritis, and you don't want arthritis. That's not a good thing to have. It's just not as intuitive. It still works, it's fine, but not as good. You can use the shoulder button to charge if you want, but when you're shooting a million times with the shoulder button, it's not gonna feel as good, and it's just, yeah, it's not gonna be as good. So in terms of form factor, I'm not entirely sure. Let me feel these two first. Okay, so yeah, this feels like just like your hands were designed for this, and this does too. But this one, it hits this part of your hand more. I'm gonna give it to Saturn. I'd say the Saturn form factor is better. But man, I think the diamond layout just works better for most games. I mean, the 6-button layout is still amazing though. You can't go wrong with the 6-button layout. I think if they made these buttons bigger, like they did on the Saturn 3D controller, where the buttons on the top are a lot bigger, and so you could still replicate that diamond layout type thing. And I guess you could on here, but it just wouldn't feel as good because the top buttons are way smaller. So it does suck that this button layout just stopped being used. Sega even killed it themselves with the Sega Dreamcast controller. They just used the diamond layout, but it was probably one of the worst uses of the diamond layout because the buttons were super tiny. It wasn't great. Where I think the Saturn 3D controller is way better than the Dreamcast controller. The Dreamcast controller is rough. So we got to answer the question, which one is better? I don't know. I think both are so good, but man, I'm gonna have to go with the Super Nintendo controller. I just think that diamond layout just works better for games. It still feels really good in the hands, but again, I love the Saturn controller. Whenever I play Saturn, I think the games are almost elevated by this controller. It just feels amazing. But the Super Nintendo controller, I gotta say, is the better overall controller. So that does it, I guess. That was a comparison.